Hey everyone, hope you all are doing well, or at least better than me. Not only am I inundated with real life commitments, but I've also caught a sore throat again. This is causing a lot of problems with content creation. Not only do I lack the time to create content, I don't have the voice to voice over my commentary either. So even though I've recorded footage sitting in my hard drive, it will have to wait. And yeah, I seek your patience in that regard, and as well as having to bear with my slightly more deadpan and hoarser voice than usual. Now we move on to today's video, where, this was inspired by one of my regular trips to the Netrunner Reddit, where someone by the name of Pakistani Army asked about one of my older videos where I ranked icebreakers by tiers. Well, I do have the link, but let's face it, that video was created quite some time ago. It's probably really irrelevant by now, so why not create a new one updated for Rain and Reverie? That's the topic of today's video, analyzing the icebreakers in today's meta. Now, just a foreknote, because Netrunner is such a complicated game. What I present here does not showcase the full story of breakers. Breakers are a lot more nuanced nowadays than simply X credits to install, Y credits to break Z ice. So yeah, take everything you see here with a grain of salt. Even though the mathematics, the numbers are probably correct, there are lots and lots of dimensions to icebreakers. Some of them cause the co-op to lose money, others use alternative costs to break ice. So it's very complicated, and you can't simply reduce breakers to a simple one or two dimensional analysis. That being said, it's not going to stop us from trying. So we are going to first look at the conventional, traditional breakers: fractors, decoders, and killers. Starting with fractors, we are going to see how expensive it is to break some commonly seen ice using some of the commonly seen breakers. If you don't see your favorite breaker on the list, it probably means that it sucks. So we are not going to look at that. Competitively speaking, these I think are the best barriers out there. And when it comes to efficiency against breaking certain ice, we have a nice variety of ice here to showcase the kind of ice that you will likely face against, from the small gear check vanilla all the way to the heavy duty Chiyashi. So what you notice immediately is that Lamb is very good at breaking big ice. Amongst all the breakers, it's the only one that can deal with multi-subroutine ice very well, due to its ability to break any number of barrier subroutines. Sherman, same story, but just slightly less efficient than Lamb, and doesn't have the barrier conversion ability either, meaning that it is more restrictive. Um, yeah, and I think one thing that you'll find really surprising about this table when you look at it is that Paperclip actually doesn't shine as much as you thought it does. Even though people have been touting Paperclip as the corroder replacement, as the new gold standard fractor. When it comes down to the mathematical analysis, it doesn't really outperform most of these breakers. If anything, Cerberus Lady outperforms Paperclip in many regards. If you are in a Shaper faction, and your deck is one that can run Cerberus Lady pretty well, there's no reason to spend 3 influence on Paperclip, because Cerberus Lady is so efficient. Simply because, unlike the other fractors, it doesn't use money to break subroutines, it uses power counters. And it has a lot of power counters to begin with. So whether you're breaking small vanillas or large Chiyashis, you can do so at a very cheap cost, right? Most barriers don't cost more than 2 credits to break, and even Chiyashi is just 5 credits and a couple of counters. Whereas Paperclip, if you see the background, the green background means that, you have a gold tier rate. It's very efficient at breaking that particular ice. So Paperclip is pretty good at breaking single subroutine small ice, requiring only 1 credit. But when it comes to larger ice, especially multi-subroutine ice like Endless Euler, there are other fractors out there that just do better. So it's very interesting to note, Paperclip isn't exactly that powerful when you crunch the numbers. There are there are factors out there that break multi-subroutine barriers better, and Cerberus Lady is overall just better. Of course, you need to refresh the lady from time to time, but otherwise, Cerberus Lady, very good breaker. What about code gates? Now, code gates, we have a lot more choices here. All of them are fairly good, kind of. Most of the good ones are in the Shaper faction, naturally. As we all know, since the core set, Shapers were the code gate breaking factions from day one. The Gordian Blade from the core set is the mark to beat. And since the core set, we've seen a couple of Shaper breakers in the Stealth Refractor and the Genius Breaker in Savant. Both of these can outperform Gordian Blade by a mile if your deck is set up correctly to take advantage of them. Both Refractor and Savant have one very powerful point in common, and that is that it costs virtually nothing to pump their strength. Refractor has a very good conversion rate of 1 stealth credit for 3 strength, whereas Savant doesn't even require pumping strength because its base strength is just too damn high. So because of that, these two breakers are ideal for breaking those 5 strength big code gates, which are very common nowadays. You have Tollbooth, Morceless, Fairchild 3, which you'll see lots of play, no matter covering all core factions. For Jinteki, you have DNA Tracker, which is not shown here, but even then, that's just 1 more stealth credit for Refractor. So basically, you can't really get much better than Refractor or Savant when it comes to breaking code gates. These breakers are very, very efficient at dealing with, the gold standard of code gates today. It's quite polarizing though, because outside of the Shaper faction, the other code gate breakers just suck. The Sunny Breaker is okay. It's not anything to write home about, but at least it gets you through servers. Airbag Nail and Black Orchestra, on the other hand, oh gosh, so many orange boxes here. You cannot break these big eyes regularly with Airbag Nail or Black Orchestra. It just doesn't fly. You can't be spending 8 or 9 credits every single time getting past Tollbooth or Fairchild 3. That's ridiculous. So yeah, Shapers do well, Sunny is okay, and the rest just suck. What about Sentries? Once again, even though Sentry breaking isn't Shaper's specialty, but it seems like Shapers have this number down, just like the code gates and barriers. Dagger is by far the best killer ever printed. It's borderline busted, to be honest. If you look at the chart, nothing even comes close to the efficiency of Dagger. I picked the most common Sentry from each corp. Now, this is obviously debatable, but I think this is a fairly fair representation. There aren't any gear check sentries or any heavy duty sentries, so as to speak. The heavy duty sentries like Hydra, I guess, and Nyx Diamond, they are not very commonly played. What you see most often are mid-range sentries, those from 4 to 6 strength, and roughly around that much res cost as well. Those tend to be the more competitive sentries, so we want to gear our killers towards breaking those sentries, and yeah, Dagger just outperforms the competition by a lot. The special shout out here goes to Savant, because Savant doubles up as a decoder, which we saw in the previous slide. Savant was a pretty good decoder. It's not a very good killer, but having both in the same package is an upside. It means that you spend 1 less click and fewer credits having to install killer, because Savant has the killer functionality wrapped into it. And it still does okay. It still breaks the 2 subroutine eyes like Architect and News Hound for a fairly reasonable cost. So Savant and Dagger, pretty okay. The go-to Sentry Breaker Nanok K surprisingly isn't all that good. And that just harks back to something I hear a lot of players say: there are no good killers in the game. Nanok K is the baseline, you could say. Baseline in terms of Sentry breaking strength, because at 1 influence, if you're a non-shaper, and let's say you are criminal, for example, and you're looking for a Sentry breaker, you look at Mongoose and you're like, okay, Mongoose is not the most efficient breaker, and it can only break 1 sentry on each server. Why am I playing this when I can just spend a measly little 1 influence to get your Nanok K, which is your baseline killer? You can't go wrong with having Nanok K in your deck. So because Nanok K is only one influence, this means that it basically suppresses almost all other killers that are less efficient than it. Because even if you print a less efficient killer in a different faction, most factions will simply splash for Nanok K instead. So, I keep saying Nanok K, it's Nanotech, I think. But anyway, Nanotech is pretty decent because its strength scales with the number of ice in the server. So, not only does this, prevent it from that. I mean, it prevents corps from stacking too much ice on the server to make a very taxing server, because that means that sentries will lose effectiveness. But it also means that it can also keep up with surveyors to some extent. I didn't include surveyor in this list simply because it's very difficult to pin down surveyor strength. Obviously, it varies depending on the stage of the game and number of ice in the server. So it's very difficult to do a surveyor comparison. But suffice to say, Nanok K and Dagger deal with Surveyor fairly well. The other factions, not enough green boxes. I mean, if you look at the left half, Shapers are hogging all the green boxes. They can deal with the smaller sentries pretty well. The right half, like Mongoose and MK Ultra, are okay at dealing with Architect. That's about it. They can't really deal with Newshound or Cortex Lock efficiently, which is a problem because these are such cheap ice. 2 to res and you're spending 4+ credits to break them. That's not reasonable. But all these killers have one thing in common. They are inefficient at breaking Archer. Archer is just too good. At 6 strength and 4 subroutines, there's no good killer answer. So that goes back to what I said. There's just no good killer. Killers are not very good right now, and Dagger is really, the only possible one in my opinion. So to sum up, if you want me to ask what do you think are the gold tier standalone breakers, standalone meaning that they don't really require much other support, I would have to point you towards the stealth breakers for code gates and sentries, whereas for barriers, Cerberus Lady takes the top. Of course, these are not independent of your deck. You need to have stealth to make the former work, and for the latter you need some way to recur your Cerberus Lady once you run out of tokens. But otherwise, these are the most efficient breakers there are. The rest are just not that efficient numbers wise. Also, honorable mention goes to Savant because, as I said, it's 2 breakers wrapped into one package and doesn't require boosting strength, so it's very efficient. So all in all, you should be playing these breakers. These are good breakers. They allow you to get into servers for the minimum number of credits. But you can save even more credits, surprisingly, by using some other non-traditional breakers, non-fractors, non-killers, non-decoders. And this is where it gets interesting. Because, Netrunner has actually evolved to a point where fractors, killers, and decoders are no longer the most efficient breakers out there. There are these niche, non-traditional breakers that can do very, very well, that would do you good if you include them in your deck. Let's have a look. Right, so to start off, we have some, interesting breakers. Femme Fatale, I'm not looking at the killer here. We all know that Femme is a terrible killer. We are looking at the bypass ability. And her bypass ability allows you to do the same thing as Ormaquah. That is, to get past an ice, by paying credits equal to the number of subroutines. This is a very good trade for the runner. By ignoring the ice's strength and instead just paying 1 credit per subroutine, you can actually effectively deal with a large swath of the corporate ice pool. Right? Archer, that used to be a problem where there are no good killer answers for it. Well, what if I told you just need to pay 4 credits to break an Archer? You can do exactly that with Ormaquah or Femme Fatale's bypass ability. So that's really, really good. These breakers are what allow you to get past nasty ice that are otherwise too inefficient to break with regular breakers. There's also Security Nexus, which while requires some support in the form of Link, and you need to pay the 8 install cost, which is ridiculous. But it is a permanent way to get past one piece of nasty ice every single turn. It is one of the best pseudo breakers in the game. It's not really an icebreaker, but it gets you past ice. It ignores the ice encounter effects, which is really, really nice. And yeah, it can be fired on any ice that you like. It's only once per turn, but it's usually more than enough to get you past glacier decks. So these are very, very good backups to have to complement your regular breaker suite in order to make it that much more efficient to get past nasty ice. Now, there are also some temporary breakers that do a very good job, much better than that of regular breakers. First off, we have the Pirate Suite, Gabali, Kongamato, and Grappling Hook. These, while only single use, are very, very efficient because, again, you ignore strength and you ignore ice subroutines. You don't pay a single credit at all to use the trash ability. You only need to pay the install cost, which is usually mitigated by the tech traders that you're running in the same deck. David is another one, same deal. You pay the install costs and then you break subroutines for free. This one's only restricted to strength 5 or higher ice, but that's usually the kind of ice that you have the most trouble with anyway. So David allows you to mitigate the downside of having to pump strength for regular breakers. A very special mention goes out to Logic Bomb. This is by far the single most efficient breaker in the game. It's 0 to install, and it allows you to bypass any ice in the game. That's ridiculous, because it means that even against Toll Booth, you're paying 0 credits to get past, right? Because you don't encounter the Toll Booth. It is super efficient, and the only downsides are that you can basically only play in Adam, it's only one use, and you have to lose all your clicks, but hey, it is bloody efficient. So yeah, one thing that you see in common with all these breakers is that even though they might be single use or they might have certain restrictions on them or requirements, they are a lot more efficient than the regular breakers in terms of dealing with the corporate ice that are in the card pool nowadays. In fact, because of this, we have now arrived in an era where having a Fractal Decoder and Killer out isn't the end all and be all. You still want to have these non-traditional breakers on the side because they allow you to save so much money. They are basically economy cards in disguise. The other thing we notice about our numerical analysis is that Shapers have a monopoly on good breakers. Smoke's breaker suite is basically the only one where the Fractal Decoder and Killer can be, efficient enough to break ice regularly. Every other breaker suite just sucks. Sunny's breakers are okay. With Sunny's drip economy, you can do pretty well with her, but Criminals and Anarchs just have no good breakers at all. So that's the ironic point. Those of you who are tuned into the current meta will probably know that the Anarch Conspiracy Breaker suite is rampant. Every Anarch runs it, and Anarchs are competitive. But when we did the number crunching, MK Ultra and Black Orchestra suck, right? So many orange boxes, they are so expensive to use. Why are they still competitive? Well, the biggest reason that these bin breakers are so good is because they are bin breakers. They can be installed from the heap at paid ability speed, and that I wouldn't say paid ability speed, but on encounter with the correct ice, which is really nasty, because this means that you are basically wrapping in an SMC with the Icebreaker itself. That's amazing. As you know, Self-Modifying Code is a very powerful Shaper card that allows you to get the correct breaker out at the correct time. And having this ability built into your breakers is such a strong effect, because this means that you don't need to pay for the breaker until you need to use it. This frees up the money for you to break other ice, to set up, and so on. So that's really good. It also synergizes with Inject. As I continuously mention, Inject is a very powerful draw card, but it mills your breakers as a drawback. Well, the bin breakers turn this drawback into an upside, and you even save a click on the install cost if you install it from the bin as opposed to manually installing it from your hand. So yeah, the install from heap ability is a lot more powerful than it seems at first sight. It saves you a lot of resources and upfront resources, whereas your criminals are busy installing their breakers preemptively from hand, allowing the corp to react to it. Against Anarchs, the court must first res their big ice, and then the Anarch player then gets to decide whether they want to break the ice with their bin breakers by installing their bin breakers from the bin, or to let the ice fire and do something else instead. Now, the inefficiency of Anarch breakers is still something that competitive players have to deal with. MK Ultra and Black Orchestra are not good against big ice, strength 5 or higher. However, with David and Data Sucker in faction, this weakness is mitigated. On the right, you see the UK Nationals winning deck for this year, piloted by Tim Fowler. You can see that there's a one-off David and a one-off Data Sucker there. They really go a long way in shoring up the inefficiencies of those breakers. These breakers also suck against gear checks, right? You are paying 3 credits to use MK Ultra or Black Orchestra, even if it's against a single subroutine ice. So something like Thimble Rig can easily wreck your day because it's so expensive to break. But as you see again in Tim Fowler's deck, he has 2 Armor Cores in his deck. That reduces the break cost of Thimble Rig from 3 credits to 1. So this is a very prime example of how you couple your regular breakers, that's to say your Fractal, Decoder, and Killer, with non-traditional breakers like Armor Core, David, and Data Sucker in order to make your regular breakers that much more efficient, or to sub in for your regular breakers when they are just not good enough at dealing with ice like Thimble Rig. Because of this, you have a fairly efficient breaker suite that is passable, and that's how you win competitions. To round off this video as an addendum, I'd like to talk a bit about breakers that I didn't analyze because they are kind of, they don't fit in the paradigm of pay money to break subroutines. Virus breakers are very interesting because you pay virus tokens instead of credits. You can't really analyze this very well because you have to take into account the possibility of a purge from your opponent. Fixed strength breakers, also very interesting. Even though they do trade money for breaking subroutines, it's very difficult to analyze them in a vacuum because their strength really determines on how well you can support these breakers, whether you can consistently meet the strength of the ice that you are encountering. So these breakers are actually very efficient at what they do. If utilized well, they can be even more efficient than the gold standard breakers like the Stealth Breaker suite. The only 2 problems you are facing are, one, as I said, you have to deal with the downsides of virus purging or being fixed strength, and the other downside you have to deal with is that these breakers do not come as a complete set. The virus breakers are missing a decoder, and the fixed strength breakers are missing a fractor. I guess Nerfer kind of counts as a fixed strength breaker, but not really. So yeah, you have to find some other substitute for those missing breakers. And that's one advantage that Anarchs have that criminals lack. While Anarchs do not have the most efficient breakers, that title belongs to Shaper, but they have a diverse set of breakers, alternative cost breakers, that in certain niche decks can really truly shine. Whereas with criminals, all their breakers cost money to use, cost money to pump strength, and are super inefficient. This is why criminals are generally not on the competitive map at all. Even those very few criminals that are actually semi-competitive are using non-standard breakers like Gabali and Grappling Hook in the case of Geist. For 419, you're probably seeing things like Security Nixus. And for Tag Me, they're using other stuff as well. So yeah, regular fair criminal is very, very far behind the rest simply because their breakers are utter shite, and splashing for breakers isn't easy in a faction that's already influence hungry, with breakers that are so dependent on other cards as well. Like, you can't really splash for stealth breakers in criminal because you need to splash for the stealth suite as well, like Net Mercur. So yeah, criminals are in a hard place. Anarchs have variety and Shapers have efficiency, and Adam has a very interesting breaker in Logic Bombs. Sunny has okay breakers. They're not the most efficient, but they don't suck as much as the criminals ones do anyway. So that's my overall breaker analysis. If you have any other things to add, be sure to comment in the comment section. Otherwise, thanks for watching and happy net running. See you next time.